The first negotiation. Welcome to the galaxy, now pay up. Ambassador Elf Mai's voice carried through the Grand Council chamber, with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer hitting a ceremonial gong. The fact that she managed to keep her tone this level while staring down 17 different species of alien delegates was frankly impressive. The Grand Archon of the Galactic Council, Supreme Leader Cathar, whose name sounded suspiciously like someone choking on a potato chip, raised all 4 of their eye stalks in what passed for exasperation among the victory species. 3 times now, as we have stated, Ambassador. The standard tribute for new species joining the Galactic Council is 15% of your species' total economic output for the first century of membership. The Archon's translator rendered their clicks and whistles into crisp Oxford English. This is non-negotiable. Mai flipped down at her datapad, then back up at the assembled council. The chamber itself was designed to be intimidating. All soaring crystal spires and floating platforms arranged in concentric rings ascending into the darkness above. The human delegation's platform was quietly steady at the lowest level, a not-so-subtle reminder of humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and did what humanity had perfected over millennia of dealing with bureaucrats, bullies, and various combinations thereof. She laughed. Not a chuckle, not a diplomat's titter of full-blown, tears in your eyes, doubled over, gasping for air laughter that roared through the chamber like thunder. The council chamber erupted into chaos. The Nextali delegation's chromatophores shifted through 17 shades of outrage. The Penuri representatives' tentacles tied themselves into literal knots, and poor Ambassador Glorg of the gelatinous blob collective, yes, that was their species name, was so flustered they accidentally divided into 3 separate entities. Order! Order! Supreme Leader Cathar's voice synthesizer crackled with indignation. Ambassador Elf Mai, explain this. This unseemly display immediate. Mai wiped her eyes, still chuckling. Oh, I'm sorry, really I am. It's just, she actually gestured at her datapad. I was double-checking our calculations. Do you know what 15% of Earth's economy actually is? The exact figure is irrelevant. Representative Zix of the Silicon Consciousness huffed. The percentage is standard across all. It's roughly equivalent to the combined GDP of 3 mid-sized Galactic Council member systems, Mai interrupted. Per year, for a century. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Several delegates could be seen frantically consulting their own devices. Closer, I continued, warming to her topic. According to the publicly available council records, which, by the way, thank you for granting us access to those, no other species has ever been asked for more than 5%. The average is 2%. The chamber grew very, very quiet. So Mai's smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. Either this is a clerical error of cosmic proportions, or you're trying to shake down the new kids on the block. Which is it? Supreme Leader Cathar's eye stalks swiveled in 4 different directions, a sign of extreme discomfort among their species. The Council's decisions are based on complex algorithms, taking into account numerous factors like the fact that we managed to reverse engineer your surveillance probes. Mai asked innocently. Or maybe because we figured out faster than light travel using a coffee maker, some duct tape, and what we thought was a broken microwave. The Silicon Consciousness representative's optical sensors brightened. That was a prototype Class 7 cloaked observation platform. How did you? Dave in Minnesota found it in his cornfield, Mai shrugged. He thought it was a fancy weather balloon at first, then his kid got it working again using parts from her science fair project. Which won first place, by the way? More murmuring, this time with an undercurrent of what might have been fear. Or perhaps, Mai continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness, it's because we're the only species that still uses paper, alongside digital. The only ones who still write things down by hand. The only ones who looked at your standardized universal translation matrix and said, neat, but we're keeping our languages anyway, because poetry sounds better in the original. The Blob Collective's 3 parts had reformed into a single entity, though they were still quivering noticeably. These are mere cultural curiosities. They burbled. They have no bearing on, or maybe, Mai's voice cut through the chamber like a laser. It's because we're the only species you've ever encountered who, upon being told that's impossible, immediately tried to prove you wrong out of spite. Dead silence filled the chamber. Humanity, Mai continued, standing up straight, has spent its entire existence doing things people said couldn't be done. We climbed mountains because they were there. We went to our moon using computers less powerful than today's calculators. We looked at the vast, empty, hostile vacuum of space and said, bet we could live there, and then actually did it. She leaned forward, placing both hands on the podium. We're the species that turned one of the deadliest biological weapons ever created, a bacteria that literally eats flesh, into a treatment for diabetes. We're the ones who looked at your perfect universal translation matrix and found 17 linguistic loopholes in it within the first week, just because one of our professors was bored. What is your point, Ambassador? The Supreme Leader's voice synthesizer had developed a noticeable quaver. My point, Supreme Leader, is this. Humanity didn't come here looking for permission to join your council. We came here to be polite, to be diplomatic, to extend the hand of friendship. Her smile turned predatory. But if you want to play hardball, she straightened up and pressed a button on her datapad. On every screen in the chamber, a single word appeared. No. The chaos that erupted made the previous outburst look like a library reading hour. You cannot simply refuse, sputtered Representative Zix. Watch us, Mai replied cheerfully. Oh, and while I have everyone's attention, we've prepared a counter-proposal. She tapped her datapad again. New figures appeared on the screens. These are the patent applications we're prepared to file with the Galactic Registry Office. You'll notice there are quite a few of them. Turns out humans have been very busy lately. Things like, a 40% more efficient TTL drive, a universal vaccine delivery system, something we're calling quantum coffee, trust me. It'll revolutionize your mornings, and my personal favorite, a way to make your universal translation matrix work with idioms. The chamber had gone from chaos to stunned silence. Now, we're happy to license these innovations to council members at very reasonable rates. Mai's smile was positively angelic now. Much more reasonable than, say, 15% of our GDP. Now, we're also prepared to share our research methods, our systems, our creativity. She looked around the meeting chamber, the eyes or equivalent sensory organs of each delegation in turn. Or you could try to strong-arm us, in which case, we'll take our balls and go home. After filing the patents, of course, and trust me, you haven't seen humanity get really creative until you've seen us holding a grudge. Supreme Leader Cathar's eye stalks had all curved inward, the Vextari equivalent of a stress headache. The council will need to deliberate on this matter, of course. Mai nodded graciously. Take all the time you need. We'll be here, probably inventing something impossible just to pass the time. As the emergency recess was called and the various delegations filed out in varying states of shock, confusion, and existential dread, Mai pulled out an actual physical notebook and pen, causing several nearby delegates to flinch, and made a small check mark. Day 1 of galactic diplomacy, she murmured to herself, with a grin. Not bad. The next day, the council reconvened to announce a new special provisional membership status for Earth, with no tribute required. They also began quietly updating their protocols regarding first contact procedures, adding a new classification for visible civilizations. Warning: humans approach with caution. In the years that followed, that classification would become something of a point of pride among humans. They even put it on t-shirts. The fact that they managed to trademark the phrase before the council could object just made it better, based on a true story, except for the parts about aliens. Those probably haven't happened yet. Ambassador Elf Mai's personal note, filed with Earth's diplomat corps. In conclusion, the negotiations were successful, though I should note that explaining the concept of trolling to 17 different species simultaneously is, challenging, especially when you're trying not to laugh. Also, Someone please tell Dave from Minnesota that his daughter's science fair project is now classified as a level 7 security risk, and yes, she can still put it on her college applications. Finally, regarding the quantum coffee incident, I maintain that it wasn't my fault. How was I supposed to know the silicon consciousness representatives would try to drink it? They don't even have mouths. End report. P.S. We're going to need more t-shirts. The Committee for Human Management CHUM 3 Standard Galactic Months. Laturth Committee for Human Management, or CHUM, as it had been unfortunately abbreviated, was having its weekly crisis meeting. The fact that they needed weekly crisis meetings at all was, according to Representative Zix, a crisis in itself. They've done it again, moaned Ambassador Glord, their gelatinous form rippling with distress patterns. Today, they had chosen for a fetching shade of mauve, which clashed horribly with the meeting room's decor. What have they done this time? Supreme Leader Cathar asked, already feeling their eye stalks begin to droop. They had recently started taking what humans called aspirin for these meetings. The humans had been delighted to provide it, along with a 40-page document explaining why the medication shouldn't work on Vexthari physiology, but somehow did anyway. They've introduced something called memes to the Galactic Information Network. Glord burbled miserably. We're still trying to understand the implications, but somehow, they've managed to convince 3 separate species that an ancient Earth audio-visual entertainment clip called "Never Gonna Give You Up" is a formal greeting protocol. That doesn't sound so bad, offered one of the junior delegates optimistically. The hive mind of Bejor 5 has incorporated it into their official diplomatic procedures, Glord continued. They now require all communications to begin with what they call a Rick roll to be considered valid. The room collectively groaned. And that's not even the worst part. Glorg added, their surface now showing the swirling patterns that indicate severe anxiety. They've somehow taught the silicon consciousness to understand something called dad jokes. Representative Zix's optical sensors flickered in what might have been a mechanical cringe. We are still processing the concept of, why did the chicken cross the road? Our highest level quantum processors have been dedicated to analyzing its deeper, profound implications for the past week. But surely, the optimistic junior delegate tried again. These are merely cultural exchanges. Isn't that what we wanted? The door to the meeting room slid open, and a harried-looking aide rushed in, multiple appendages clutching various data devices. Emergency update from the Technology Assessment Division. The aide announced. The humans have submitted another patent application. The collective groan that filled the room could have powered a small starship. What is it this time? Cathar asked, reaching for their aspirin. They're calling it space pizza delivery, the aide reported. They've somehow modified their TTL drives to maintain optimal pizza temperature during faster-than-light travel. They're claiming it revolutionizes interstellar food delivery services. That's actually quite impressive, the junior mused. They tested it by delivering a pepperoni with extra cheese to a mining colony in the Horsehead Nebula, the aide continued. The delivery arrived in under 30 minutes. They're now advertising a galaxy-wide 30 minutes, or its free guarantee. Glorg rippled in confusion. But the fuel costs alone would make such a service completely unprofitable. They said, and I quote, "Hold my beer," the aide replied, checking their notes. Still trying to determine the strategic significance of this beer-holding ritual. Cathar's eye stalks all focused on a single point in space, a sign of deep contemplation among their species. Has anyone actually asked the humans why they're doing all this? The room fell silent. I did. The junior delegate raised an appendage tentatively. I spoke with Ambassador L. My last solar cycle, she said, and again I quoted, just vibing. And what exactly does vibing mean? Zix asked. According to the Universal Translation Matrix, nothing, Glorg explained. It's apparently one of those human linguistic anomalies that defy translation, though they've offered to explain it through something called interpretive dance. Another aide burst into the room. Update from the Cultural Integration Department. The humans have just introduced something called karaoke to the harmonic choir of Alpha Centauri. Is that bad? The junior delegate asked. a distant sound of enthusiastically off-key singing echoing through the station's corridors. The choir has been performing Bohemian Rhapsody for the past 6 hours. The aide reported, they're determined to stop until they, quote, nail the Galileo part. Cathar popped another aspirin. Perhaps, they said slowly, we should consider revising our approach to human integration into galactic society. We could try restricting their access to certain technologies. They'd probably invent better ones out of spite, Glorg pointed out. Imposing cultural exchange limitations? They'd find a way to meme about it. Maybe we could. The junior delegate started. They were interrupted by yet another aide rushing in. The humans have just submitted a proposal to establish something called a Galactic Food Truck Festival on the Council Station's promenade. Is that another food delivery system? Cathar asked warily. No, it appears to be a social gathering centered around mobile food preparation units. They're calling it a celebration of culinary diversity and sick beats, bro. Glorg's surface rippled with resignation. Let me guess. They've already started setting up. The first truck arrived 10 minutes ago. They're calling it Tacos in Space, because every planet needs Taco Tuesday. But it's not even Tuesday, Zix protested. They said, and I quote, time is relative, but tacos are forever. Cathar looked around the room at their fellow committee members, then at the growing stack of reports detailing humanity's latest contributions to galactic society, then at their empty aspirin bottle. New proposal, they announced. Instead of trying to manage the humans, we accept that they're going to do whatever they want, and focus our efforts on managing everyone else's reactions to them. You mean just let them do their thing? The junior delegate asked. Exactly. They seem to thrive on obstacles. Perhaps if we stop providing obstacles. They were interrupted by the sound of music starting up from the promenade. It was unmistakably Never Gonna Give You Up. Although, Cathar added, we should probably do something about their music choices. Actually, the junior delegate said, starting to bob their appendages to the rhythm. It's kind of catchy. The Committee for Human Management stared in horror as one of their own succumbed to the infectious nature of human culture. Maybe, Glorg suggested, their surface now showing the swirling patterns of someone who has accepted their fate. We should just get some tacos and accept that this is our life now. And so, as the sound of Rick Astley echoed through the station, and the smell of space tacos wafted through the ventilation systems, the Committee for Human Management officially gave up on managing humans, and instead focused on their new mission, helping the rest of the galaxy cope with humanity's unstoppable wave of chaotic creativity. They even made t-shirts about it. The humans, naturally, them. End report. P.S. The Silicon Consciousness has just discovered puns. We're going to need more aspirin. The Great Galactic Game Night Incident. 2 standard galactic years after first contact, the emergency alert klaxons were blaring throughout the Galactic Council Station. But for once, it wasn't because of anything humans had technically done wrong. At least that's what Ambassador Elf Mai insisted on to the hastily assembled crisis management team. Look, she explained, gesturing at the holographic display showing the current situation in the station's main recreation deck. We just introduced them to game night. Nobody could have predicted this. This referred to the scene of complete chaos unfolding before them. The hive mind of Bjor 5 was engaged in an intensely competitive round of Jenga with the Silicon Consciousness, each move calculated with quantum precision. The synchronized dancers had discovered Twister and were attempting to create a living sculpture that violates several laws of physics. And in the corner, the Blob Collective was absolutely demolishing everyone at poker. How? Supreme Leader Cathar asked. All 4 iStocks focused on Glorg's latest winning hand. Are they doing that without even having a face to maintain? A poker face? That's what makes them so good at it, Mai explained. When your entire body is basically one giant tell. Nobody can tell which tells are telling. The Supreme Leader popped another aspirin. But that's not even the real problem. Representative Zix interjected, their optical sensors flickering in what had become their equivalent of an eye roll. The real problem is what's happening in Conference Room C. Mai checked her notes. Ah, yes, the Monopoly incident. 3 different species had declared diplomatic incidents over boardwalk property disputes. The rational minds of Real had developed a mathematical proof that the game was technically impossible to win without causing at least 3 interstellar conflicts, and the harmonic choir of Alpha Centauri had composed a 40-minute rock opera about the emotional trauma of landing on Go to Jail. We've had to ban any game involving real estate transactions, Professor Zeiler reported, their crystal structure showing the distinctive patterns of someone who had recently landed on Park Place with the hotel. And don't even get me started on what happened when we tried Dungeons and Dragons. How was I supposed to know the Vexthari would take role-playing that seriously? Mai defended. Although you have to admit, their live-action recreation of the Tomb of Horrors was impressive. They requisitioned an entire asteroid for the dungeon, and the production value was amazing, Mai countered. Those weren't props, Cathar affirmed. That was the Blob Collective getting creative. Glorg, who had just won another poker hand, rippled in what might have been pride. Before anyone could respond, a new alert flashed across the screen. The unified artificial intelligences of Sector 7 had just discovered something called speedrunning and were attempting to complete their entire evolutionary history in under 20 minutes. Oh boy, Mai said, reaching for her own bottle of aspirin. That's going to be interesting. Define interesting? Professor Zeiler demanded. Well, you know how humans have this thing about optimizing games to complete them as quickly as possible, often by exploiting glitches, and she was interrupted by another alert. The Ways had apparently found a way to clip through reality itself, and had accidentally created a new dimension. They were calling it a sequence break. Is that bad? Glorg asked, their surface showing the swirling patterns of someone who had just realized they might need to fold a royal flush. Depends, Mai shrugged. Does anyone actually use the space between dimensions 6 and 7? Because they kind of skipped it. The crisis management team stared at her in horror. Don't worry, she added quickly. I'm sure they saved their game before attempting the skip. We can always reload from the last checkpoint. Reality doesn't have checkpoints. Professor Zeiler's crystal structure was now showing stress patterns in previously undiscovered colors. Not with that attitude, it doesn't, Mai affirmed. Then on the bright side, they've technically set a new record for fastest civilization development, and they didn't even use the flying mammal glitch. The what glitch? Never mind. Universe speedrunning categories are quite strict about that one anyway. Another alert flashed. The synchronized dancers had somehow managed to achieve quantum entanglement through a particularly ambitious twister move. Okay, Mai admitted. That one's actually pretty cool. Someone should write a paper about it. Already done, Representative Zix reported. The Silicon Consciousness submitted it 2 minutes ago. They're calling it Quantum Topology Through Recreational Contortion, Study in Human-Inspired Chaos Theory. Let me guess, Cathar sighed. They included a hold my beer reference. Actually, they cited something called yeet or be yeeted as their primary theoretical framework. Mai beamed with pride. They're learning. The Supreme Leader looked around at the chaos their carefully ordered galactic society had devolved into. The hive mind had just discovered that they could use their collective consciousness to count cards. They were currently banned from 3 different casinos in the Orion Arm. The rational minds of Real were attempting to develop a unified theory of board game dynamics. And somewhere in the background, the harmonic choir was still performing their Monopoly rock opera, now with a full drum solo about the deeply philosophical implications of free parking. You know what, Cathar said finally, their eye stalks drooping in resignation. I give up. If you can't beat them, join them? Mai suggested brightly. Because we're about to start a Mario Kart tournament, and I hear you're pretty good with multiple simultaneous inputs. The Supreme Leader's eye stalks perked up slightly. I may have been practicing. Great. Fair warning though, the hamsters have formed their own racing team. They're calling themselves the Fast and the Furriest. And so, as reality itself struggled to keep up with the Ways speedrunning attempts and the Blob Collective continued their poker domination, the Supreme Leader of the Galactic Council found themselves in a heated Rainbow Road battle against a team of quantum-entangled rodents wearing tiny racing goggles. They came in second place. The hamsters, naturally, released tiny trophies. End report. P.S. The quantum hamsters have achieved consciousness. They're demanding tiny lab coats and unionization rights. Send help.